In the depths of human experience, there exists a particular kind of suffering, distinct from physical pain, that penetrates the very essence of our being. It's a feeling of unnaturalness, as if a glitch has occurred in the fabric of life itself. Born into a world populated by countless individuals, many feel detached, adrift, as if life has turned its back on them. Silence becomes unbearable, and stillness weighs heavily on the chest, and within this quietude the question arises, why me? But what if this experience isn't a tragic accident or a cruel punishment? What if loneliness, true solitude, is an essential chapter, a turning point leading not to despair but to awakening? Carl Jung, the eminent psychologist, saw in solitude something more than just something to be feared or avoided. For him, isolation was a sacred space, a prerequisite for genuine self-knowledge. He believed that moments of profound loneliness are not accidents, but invitations, initiations, portals to a deeper understanding of oneself. When life isolates, it's easy to feel forgotten, to see others thriving, laughing, connecting and loving, while you're left behind. It can feel like abandonment. But what happens next, when this period ends? Carl Jung recognized that individuals destined for a high mission often choose a path marked by seclusion. This isn't because of their inability to interact, but because the hustle and bustle of the surrounding world can drown out the inner transformations they are destined to undergo. In the public consciousness, loneliness is often perceived as a failure, as a sign of distress. However, from the perspective of depth psychology and spirituality, isolation is often the very catalyst that is necessary for personal growth. It's not a rejection by life, but its way of preparing a person for something greater. It's worth remembering the outstanding individuals who have had a tremendous impact on the world: thinkers, creators, spiritual mentors. Their greatness didn't arise in a crowd or in the process of constant communication. It was forged in silence, in separation from the external world, in those moments when the only way out was to turn inward. Buddha attained enlightenment while sitting alone under the Bodhi tree. Jesus spent 40 days in the desert, meditating. Jung himself went into deep introspection, recording his inner experiences in the famous Red Book, a chronicle of spiritual and psychological awakening. These weren't just passive retreats from the world, but conscious attempts to confront oneself. Personal transformation is a process that rarely occurs in a comfort zone. Surrounded by distractions, personal growth slows down. Genuine changes occur in silence and solitude, in moments of discomfort, when a person confronts the contradiction between their self-image and their true essence, hidden beneath a mask. A period of isolation can be perceived as preparation for something important, for a discovery possible only in the absence of external noise, for something powerful and unique, intended specifically for that person. However, most people don't withstand the test of loneliness. They don't find the strength within themselves to uncover its true purpose. They tend to interpret isolation as rejection, fall into despair, convinced of their unimportance, unworthiness, and unlovability. This illusion represents the main danger of isolation. It's not loneliness itself that breaks people, but the belief in its endlessness and meaninglessness. Carl Jung argued that this is the greatest misconception. Loneliness is not a curse, but a mirror reflecting a person's true face, if they have the courage to look into it. In moments when the veil of distractions disappears, the endless stream of social media, empty conversations, and the hustle and bustle of everyday life, a person is left alone with themselves. At this moment, the inner voice becomes especially loud. Long-forgotten thoughts and experiences begin to surface in consciousness. Insecurities that were previously ignored now sound deafening. Regrets, carefully suppressed, burst forth like ghosts from the past. This state can resemble a plunge into the abyss of one's own mind. It is at this point that most people seek to escape from themselves, again immersing themselves in a world of distractions, grabbing their phones, seeking new acquaintances, or surrounding themselves with noise. However, those who find the strength within themselves to remain in silence and face what they have been avoiding embark on a path that Carl Jung called individuation. Individuation is a complex process of becoming oneself, of acquiring an authentic personality free from the influence of societal expectations, cultural stereotypes, and family beliefs. It is a return to the original self, buried under the weight of external influences. This path does not promise comfort and may even be painful, but it is absolutely necessary for achieving wholeness. Many people live as if they are broken fragments, their personalities shaped by the desires of others and their perceptions of what they should be. But in solitude, these influences disappear. All that remains is the unfiltered self, which is both frightening and liberating. The feeling of deep emotional anguish that accompanies loneliness is explained by the fact that it is like a mirror, reflecting the true state of affairs. A person comes face to face with reality. Perhaps the path they are on in life is imposed from the outside, and the personality they present to the world is just a mask, hiding their true self. In the silence and solitude, when external stimuli do not distract, the inner voice, previously drowned out by the noise of everyday life, begins to assert itself insistently, demanding attention. However, this is not punishment, but a healing process, like a cleansing fire. Suffering is not without meaning, it is sacred. Pain burns away the superficial, dispels the darkness of delusion, casts off all that is not the true self, freeing up space for something new to be born. Unfortunately, many people do not see loneliness as an opportunity for self-discovery and growth, but rather as a personal tragedy. They convince themselves of their own worthlessness, feel rejected, and fall into despair. Instead of listening to the message that loneliness carries, they waste precious time and energy running away from it. The renowned psychologist Carl Jung warned against an excessive fixation on suffering, urging people not to identify with pain and not to build their identity on it. Pain is certainly a valuable teacher, but it should not become a permanent refuge. It is necessary to learn lessons from experience, but not to wallow in suffering, turning it into the meaning of one's existence. The more desperately a person tries to avoid silence, the more it takes hold of their mind. But if they just accept it, allow it to envelop them, immerse themselves in its depths, something amazing happens. Beneath the veil of everyday hustle and bustle, the seed of the true self begins to sprout. Those who emerge from voluntary or forced solitude transformed, tempered, enriched with wisdom and self-knowledge are not those who fiercely fought against loneliness, but those who, on the contrary, submitted to it. They used the precious time alone with themselves for deep reflection, to discard externally imposed stereotypes and remember who they were before the world began to dictate its will to them. That is why isolation, despite the feeling of oppressive emptiness, is, in essence, a sacred frontier, a kind of rite of initiation, a trial by fire. Not everyone is destined to go through it, but those who withstand this test will never be the same again. When a person finds themselves alone, truly and unconditionally, they enter a kind of psychological desert. There are no signs here, no familiar distractions, no one rushes to praise them for their efforts, and no one offers a map of the area. A person remains alone with themselves, and this, although frightening to the depths of their soul, is exactly what they need. Solitude seems to mute the worldly bustle, allowing one to hear the inner voice that embodies the true essence of a person. It is in moments of solitude that the opportunity arises to ask oneself key questions. Who am I outside of social roles and expectations? What are my beliefs, not imposed from the outside? What do I really want, beyond mere survival in search of a deeper meaning? Carl Jung, an outstanding psychologist, argued that the unconscious, this hidden storehouse of our desires, fears, instincts, and forgotten truths, opens up to us in moments of detachment from the outside world. In the silence of inner space, the unconscious communicates more clearly, manifesting not in words but through feelings, dreams, memories, and sudden insights, as if arising from nowhere. These phenomena are not accidental, they are messages, signs from the deep self. In modern society, there is often a call for constant movement, for avoiding pauses and the discomfort that arises in a state of immobility. However, Genuine personal transformation requires a stop, a pause, deep self-analysis, and the ability to listen to one's inner voice, even if what is heard causes fear or discomfort. The alchemy of loneliness is a slow and mysterious process in which silence is transformed into an awareness of one's self. It is not a flash of lightning revelation, but a gradual unfolding, like the growth of a seed breaking through the soil. First, darkness reigns, then pressure increases, and then, inside, something begins to stir. A new sprout is born. However, this transformation requires active participation. If a person desperately resists loneliness, tries to drown it out, or runs away from it, transformation becomes impossible. They seem to be stuck in a vicious circle, repeatedly reproducing old patterns of behavior, clinging to superficial masks, and fearing to look deep into their true essence. In this context, Jung's idea of working with the shadow self takes on particular significance. According to Jung, the shadow is the sum of all the traits a person rejects in themselves, unpleasant qualities, suppressed emotions, and truths they prefer to ignore. These parts of the personality do not simply disappear. Instead, they hide in the hidden corners of the consciousness, waiting for their moment. And when a person delves into solitude, the shadow comes to the forefront. At this moment, anger may manifest itself, anger that one didn't even suspect existed, sadness that one has kept locked up for years, as well as feelings of guilt, envy, and fear. All of this can seem incredibly overwhelming. However, Jung taught that integrating the shadow, that is, accepting these rejected parts of oneself instead of denying them, is the key to achieving wholeness of personality. Thus, solitude, embraced with an open heart and courage, is transformed into a unique platform for personal integration. In this process, a person gradually but surely reclaims the lost parts of their being. It is a common belief that happiness lies in avoiding suffering, but as Jung argued, true peace is found through a deep understanding of pain, through confronting it and overcoming the fear of the dark aspects of one's own psyche. When a person gains the ability to calmly dwell with their pain, listen attentively to it, and learn from it, it loses its power. At this moment, a remarkable transformation occurs. Clarity reigns in the consciousness. A person begins to realize which relationships were based on fear or a sense of duty, how they abandoned their own interests in order to please others. They see how they played other people's roles instead of living their own lives, and begin to reclaim their authentic existence, distinct from the expectations of those around them. This is the kind of freedom that solitude offers. This process is neither quick nor easy, but it is absolutely honest. In the quiet of solitude, a person can rediscover passions that once inspired them, but were discarded under the influence of opinions about their impracticality. The inner child, not traumatized but inquisitive, playful and creative, begins to make its voice heard again. Memories of dreams left in the past because of their non-compliance with generally accepted norms are resurrected, and suddenly these dreams no longer seem unattainable. On the contrary, they are perceived as a vital necessity. It is sad to realize that the vast majority of people never experience the true depth of their existence. They are doomed only to superficially glide along the waves of life, avoiding solitude at all costs, mistakenly taking it for oppressive loneliness. In this hustle and bustle, they overlook the priceless treasure that is hidden beneath the mask of discomfort. However, if fate has led a person to solitude even against their will, it is worth considering that life is capable of offering something more than just comfort and ease. It can open the way to truth, and truth, as is known, is not always pleasant and easily digestible. It is capable of wounding, exposing unsightly sides, demanding change, but at the same time it grants liberation. Truth clears the space of lies and delusions in order to make room for genuine knowledge. That is why people who have gone through the crucible of solitude often radiate a special strength. This strength does not manifest itself in loud statements or aggressive pressure. It is quiet, rooted, unwavering. Such people no longer need the approval of those around them because they have learned to accept and value themselves as they are. They do not feel a desperate need for universal attention because they have come to terms with the possibility of remaining unnoticed. And most importantly, they are not afraid of being misunderstood. They prefer to remain true to themselves rather than earn approval at any cost. Solitude presents a unique opportunity for a person to return to the origins of their being, to know the depths of their own self. However, this valuable gift is not presented just like that. It must be earned by going through trials and overcoming internal barriers. A person has to endure nights when the silence presses down with its weight, come to terms with intrusive thoughts that cause anxiety, and give free rein to feelings, whether quiet tears or violent bursts of rage. Only by going through the process of inner transformation is a person able to form a new, stronger, and more conscious version of themselves. As the famous psychologist Carl Jung once remarked, people are ready to go to any lengths, even the most ridiculous, just to avoid meeting their own soul. However, those who find the courage to face themselves face to face, who honestly and humbly explore the depths of their inner world, acquire something truly rare and valuable: wholeness. Therefore, if life has led a person to a period of solitude, one should not rush to fill the emptiness with external noise and distractions. Instead, one should listen to oneself, feel the moment, allow oneself to breathe deeply, and believe that this seemingly empty space is actually fertile ground for the growth of something extraordinary. It is in solitude that a person can find a deep and unwavering connection with themselves which no one else can give them. Ultimately, loneliness is not just a state of isolation or a form of punishment, but rather an opportunity to return to one's true essence, to the self that one is destined to become. In the depths of loneliness lies a sacred fire, the flame of which is meant not to destroy, but to purify. Of course, this state can be uncomfortable and sometimes perceived as punishment, but in reality, loneliness is a kind of crucible, and only those who dare to enter its heat will emerge transformed. When everything familiar is discarded, when the voices of others fall silent, when distractions and the roles that one is used to playing disappear, something genuine and honest remains: one's true self. This is not the version that others see, not the image created for the outside world, but the unfiltered, vulnerable, and at the same time inwardly strong self that has been waiting for its moment to breathe freely. Carl Jung viewed this kind of experience not as a deviation from the norm, but as the very essence of life. He believed that life constantly pushes a person to encounter their unconscious, that vast inner world filled with dreams, fears, instincts, and forgotten truths. The gates to another reality rarely swing open to the accompaniment of bustle and noise. Rather, they open slightly in moments of silence, solitude, when one feels abandoned on the sidelines of life, when the flow of invitations dries up, the phone falls silent, and the all-consuming stillness begins to suffocate. It is in such moments that one is closest to touching something sublime and sacred. At first, this may be perceived not as a blessing, but as a heavy burden. But behind the veil of pain lies a call to transformation, to finding greater integrity, sincerity, and alignment with one's true nature. Many tend to see only the negative aspect of isolation. It is seen as evidence of social inadequacy, as a sign of being unwanted. However, loneliness, especially the kind that comes uninvited, is often a harbinger of an inner rite of initiation, strongly demanded by the soul, even if the ego resists. It is worth looking at this phenomenon through the prism of the seasons. No one questions the purpose of winter. It is a period when everything around freezes, seems lifeless, but under the cover of the earth, the roots continue to grow and deepen, preparing for a new cycle of rebirth. Human loneliness performs a similar function. Outwardly, it may seem like a lull, but in the depths, significant changes are unfolding. That is why spiritual practices of various cultures, from Buddhism to mystical currents of Christianity and Sufism, attach particular importance to periods of solitude. In silence and seclusion, the soul finds its way to itself. But do not think that this pastime is exclusively passive. One does not simply dwell in silence waiting for revelations. It is necessary to actively, with compassion and sincerity, interact with oneself, listen to what was previously ignored, feel what was carefully muffled, and meet pain not as a victim, but as a researcher. It is at this moment that profound changes begin to occur. Parts of the personality that were previously rejected, whether fears, past mistakes, or perceived shortcomings, begin to be perceived not as adversaries, but rather as messengers. The realization comes that these shadows, which one has avoided throughout life, never sought to destroy, but only tried to guide one to wholeness. This is the essence of the Jungian concept of individuation, the process of integrating all aspects of the personality, including those from which one recoiled. The goal is not to achieve perfection, but to find unity. To become a whole person means accepting one's contradictions, one's light and one's shadow, and acknowledging, this is me, whole and indivisible. Such self-acceptance rarely occurs in the company of others. It requires solitude, confrontation with discomfort, and going through trials. In modern society, the desire to avoid any manifestations of discomfort is deeply rooted. Pain is perceived as a signal of malfunction, and healing should be quick, effective, and painless. However, genuine healing, affecting the deepest strings of the soul, is a complex and multifaceted process, including periods of grief, anger, and unexpected discoveries. This process takes time and patience. It cannot be accelerated, it must be cherished. It is loneliness, if listened to, that can teach patience, awareness, and depth. In solitude, time seems to slow down, eliminating the need to rush or seek approval from others. Attention shifts to the inner world, to breathing, thoughts, and the subtlest shades of emotions. One realizes how noisy life has been, and for the first time in a long while, senses what it means to be alone with oneself. This state of awareness paves the way for transformation. In the quiet of solitude, the process of forgiveness begins, not only of others, but also of oneself. Stories and beliefs that have hindered development are released. I'm not good enough. I'm too broken. No one will understand me. These narratives lose their power when one spends enough time with them to see their fallacy. In solitude, the ability to dream reawakens, not just about achievements, but about the meaning of life. Important questions arise. What does a meaningful life mean to me? What contribution do I want to make to the world? Who am I when no one is watching? The answers to these questions allow one to rewrite the script of life, based not on the expectations of others, but on one's own truth. Solitude provides a unique opportunity for self-analysis and re-evaluation of values, allowing one to separate the true from the apparent. However, this process requires significant inner strength and is not easy for everyone. Many people prefer to avoid facing themselves, drowning out inner silence and pain with external noise and superficial relationships. But those who find the strength to stop and go through this trial gain a rare quality, inner resilience and freedom. They do not become flawless. They still experience pain and seek connection, but they are distinguished by a deep stability acquired not through avoiding difficulties, but through consciously overcoming them. This is the alchemy of solitude, transforming it from a punishment into a process of cleansing and renewal of the soul. Having gone through this, one gains wisdom and becomes a beacon for others, radiating calm and confidence. There comes a moment when the period of solitude begins to draw to a close. It happens imperceptibly, without grand pronouncements, but one feels internal changes. The silence that once seemed oppressive is now perceived as sacred, and the loneliness that caused pain is replaced by a sense of peace. Having overcome this test, the question arises, what lies ahead? It is widely believed that after experiencing a period of solitude and self-discovery, one can easily return to the old life, to the usual routine, connections, and activities, as if nothing had happened. However, the reality is that the return to the world occurs in a completely different quality, and the world itself meets the changed person in a new way. The real test begins when inner transformation requires integration into external reality. Carl Jung, a prominent psychologist, deeply understood this stage. In his opinion, the process of individuation, that is, the deep psychological formation of a holistic and authentic personality, cannot be considered complete until a person embodies their truth in the world. Transformation that remains locked only within the walls of the mind or heart is, in essence, not transformation as such. It must be lived, felt in practice, which is a complex task. Diving into the depths of one's own self often leads to a re-evaluation of values. What previously seemed important and significant may now seem trivial and meaningless. Relationships that once seemed unbreakable may lose their relevance. Activities that filled all free time may lose all meaning. One begins to feel a need for depth, sincerity, and purpose. Initially, this discrepancy between the inner and outer world can cause feelings of confusion and disorientation. One may feel alienated even in the familiar surroundings of one's own life. Those around may notice the changes taking place, but not always understand how to react to them. Some welcome these changes with enthusiasm, while others, on the contrary, resist, trying to return everything to the former, familiar patterns of behavior. However, it is important to remember that personal growth is a real and significant process. One is not obliged to meet the expectations of the world, representing the version of oneself that is already in the past. Returning from a state of isolation and loneliness is not about fitting into a framework, but about the opportunity to manifest one's true essence, integrity, and confidence. This does not mean that one needs to shout about their transformation for all to hear. Often the deepest and most powerful changes happen quietly and imperceptibly. They are rooted in actions, not just in words. One begins to move through life with greater awareness and purpose. One speaks less, but every word is filled with meaning. The choice of relationships is based not on fear or loneliness, but on a sense of harmony and alignment. The ability to say no arises not from a sense of self-preservation, but because personal boundaries become sacred. There is no longer a need to deny oneself for the approval of others. One gains the ability to remain true to oneself, and this loyalty becomes a reliable support. This inner strength does not need to be demonstrated, it does not seek to attract attention, but its presence is unmistakably felt. Others sense its vibes, perceive it in the manner of behavior, in the reticence, in the ability to create a comfortable environment for others without sacrificing one's own individuality. Gradually, such a person begins to attract into their life what harmonizes with their inner world. New people appear in their environment, relationships with whom are built not on the desire to be useful or to please, but on the principles of mutual respect and sincerity. Doors of opportunity open, resonating with their deepest values. The external world begins to reflect their inner truth. Although this process does not happen instantly and is not without obstacles, but it is steadily moving in this direction. When difficulties arise, and they inevitably do, one looks at them from a different angle. They no longer perceive discomfort as a threat. They have come to know their shadow side, have learned to get along with their loneliness, and know how to return to a state of mental equilibrium. This is where their strength lies. To a large extent, it is loneliness that teaches them to be their own reliable refuge. And when one possesses such inner stability, the world can no longer so easily unbalance them. Rejections cause less pain. Failures are perceived more as valuable feedback than as a harsh sentence. Silence is no longer frightening. They have learned to engage in dialogue with themselves in its stillness. However, perhaps the most valuable aspect of returning from the depths of self-isolation is that the individual acquires something that modern society, mired in bustle, speed, and superficial contacts, desperately needs: genuine presence. A personality tempered by solitude exudes a rare serenity. They no longer seek to impress others, do not seek approval, and do not try to prove their significance, because they have found true value in silence and solitude. This inner peace becomes a true gift to others. A person who has known loneliness gains the ability to notice another's pain, even if it is carefully hidden. They listen differently, not just waiting for their turn to speak, but sincerely trying to understand the other person. They ask deep questions, offering space for reflection rather than ready-made solutions. Without intentionally striving for it, such a person becomes a mirror for others, reminding them of the existence of a rich, inner world, yearning to be heard. This is how loneliness turns into service, but not through preaching learned truths, but through embodying them in life. Stillness becomes a healing balm, and inner truth becomes a quiet light that unobtrusively gives others the right to stop, look inside themselves, and heal. Even when one dedicates themselves to serving others, opening new horizons, a sense of solitude does not leave them. They return to it again and again, not succumbing to sadness, but experiencing sacred awe. Loneliness turns into a kind of practice, a personal sanctuary, a place where one can restore inner balance after the invasion of external noise. After all, personal growth is a continuous process, and the path of self-discovery has no end. There will always be something new to discover, something to be freed from, and something to be returned to. Oneself. However, now one knows how to walk this path. They have gone through the fire of trials and endured. They have immersed themselves in silence and heard the voice of their soul, and this experience lives in them like a compass, always pointing to what is truly important. As Jung once said, "Only when you look into your own heart will you gain clear vision. He who looks outside dreams, he who looks inside awakens." And now one has awakened, but not in the dramatic and spectacular manner that the world so loves to romanticize, but in a stable and grounded way. They have come to know the true world because they have earned it. They know the taste of self-respect because they have created it themselves. And they realize that they can stand alone, not because they have to, but because they have learned to. And so one embarks on the path of life with a new worldview, not alienated from the world, but not dissolved in it completely. They carry their loneliness not as a burden of suffering, but as a treasure trove of worldly wisdom. From now on they are the master of their own destiny, and it is from this moment that cardinal changes occur. The true value of loneliness lies not in escaping from reality, but in finding the fullness of self-expression. There comes an awareness that despite all the trials, one was not broken, was not left behind, and was not consigned to oblivion. On the contrary, everything he has experienced has become a tool, honing his personality, giving it depth and versatility. Now he is ready not just to return to his former state, but to boldly move forward, relying on the experience and qualities he has acquired